This hour of broadcasting brought to you by TwoWayRadioCenter.com, a Motorola value-added reseller. Welcome to the Church Safety and Security broadcast with the Church Safety Guys. Brought to you by Vigilant Impact. The Church Safety Guys is a nonprofit organization dedicated to equipping the vigilant, those men and women who stand watch, keeping our houses of worship and places of faith safe. We believe church safety and security must be a ministry first and have engaged, servant leaders who continually strive for excellence and teams of motivated volunteers that are always training. Join us for the next hour as the Church Safety Guys unpack safety, security, leadership, and ministry operations with your hosts, Dr. James McGarvey and Mike Scully. This broadcast is also available on YouTube, your favorite podcast platforms, churchsafetyguys.com, and on the original Church Security app. Download it today. Feel free to like, subscribe, and share with your ministry.
All right. Welcome to the Church Safety and Security broadcast with the Church Safety Guys. I am James, and filling in for our normal host on Sunday evening is Jared.
Hey, James. Good to be here. Thanks for, I'll do my best to fill the big shoes, but always glad to be on the broadcast.
I appreciate it. I appreciate you jumping in and pitch hitting. I'm not sure when we're going to air this, but I do know that it's Mike's anniversary. So I kind of felt bad about asking him to, although his wife, being as gracious as she is, would probably be like, so do you want to spend the night with me or James? Because he spends just about as much time with me going through stuff.
Yeah. Are we doing dinner before or after the broadcast?
Yeah. For sure. But if this is your first time joining us, welcome. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for listening. And as always, you can visit our website at churchsafetyguys.com. And there's some great resources available through that and also through the Church Security app, which is free to download and free to register. And we send out notifications and just different informational things that are available that we update regularly. So I am in Columbus, Ohio. Jared's actually in Arizona. And he, for those of you that, I don't know, maybe haven't seen an episode with him, he's actually part of our advisory board. And so occasionally, when we have a need, those folks jump in and help us with the broadcast. So it's always a fun treat. I know Mike was really looking forward to this episode, but I was like, dude, take a break. I got Jared. I'm good. So, but on this broadcast, we wanted to talk a little bit about personalities and teams and just really kind of diving in a little bit to how your personality kind of impacts your safety ministry and your team, and how you can kind of navigate that a little bit. And I think this episode, I keep saying episode, it could end up being 2 episodes. We might break it in half just to make it a little bit easier. So if we do, the next episode will be a follow-up with this. But in the past, we've had Jason Heavner with us, and Jason is with Wisdom and Knowledge, and has a great website, has done a lot of research from a biblical perspective on personalities, and is very well versed in it. And he has been on the broadcast a couple of times before. And usually those broadcasts, we get a lot of really positive feedback, and everybody likes it when he shows up. So I will pull him in, and we will get rolling right away. So Welcome, Jason.
Howdy. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here.
Always good to be here.
Yeah, for sure. And I wasn't fibbing or anything. When you're on our broadcast and we do a broadcast, we see a lot higher numbers. So
cool.
That tells me
right.
from the topic standpoint,
yeah,
that tells me that that people are really interested in. And we push church safety and security from a ministry standpoint, and understanding that it really goes beyond just active shooter training, just first aid training. And so we want to encourage church safety and security teams to be into discipleship, mentorship, understanding, and really connecting with people as they serve. So for me, understanding, I mean, this is something that I could jump into and brainstorm with you probably all day about it. Just because I think there's such a need right now, even from the churches that reach out to us, there's such a need for an understanding of how something practical like we call it MBTI, but a personality instrument or personality test, how we can leverage that to do ministry better. And so because we've had so many folks reach out to us about it, it fits as a good topic for us to talk about.
I think the statistic recently is 88%. I think that's right. Of Fortune 500 companies are using it in their team building, and so it would make sense that churches are also trying to figure out, is this okay to use? How do we use this? Because it seems to be pretty effective, and that's one of the things that is notable.
Yeah, well, and I know there's always, like, we've had people even reach out to us and say, well, that's not really biblical. Is it biblical? And kind of throw that question mark up of, should I use this? Because I'm not really sure if this is something that's applicable, because the Bible doesn't say a whole lot specifically about MBTI or personality. But true. I love your take on it, because it's kind of connected to your story and how you got pulled into this. So I'll go ahead and throw that at you. So I'll let you explain that.
Thanks. Well, I've known James most of my life.
You don't have to go back that far.
Okay. Well, we both went to a church together, and many years have passed since then, and it's been good years. But what got me into it? Well, there was a time, and it's a kind of a hard time, I guess, for a lot of people, is when churches can split up or fall apart. And I just saw that so many of these people seem to love God and want to follow God, but these relationships kept falling apart. And so I was like, what in the world is going on here, Lord? And like, we want to be representative of you. And if we can't do it better in the world, what do we have to offer? So anyways, I went on a kind of I stumbled upon MBTI, whereas a friend of mine said, hey, take this test and see what your personality is. So I took it, and you answer a whole bunch of questions, and sure enough, after you answer all those questions, they repeat back to you what you just told them, and it's accurate. So but what was interesting about it is that I found out there were a lot of other people like me. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. The other people answer the questions the same way. And that kind of got me thinking about the usefulness of this in my own life. And but then, being a believer in Jesus Christ and wanting the Bible to be preeminent, I said, okay, wait a minute now. This looks really helpful. This looks really accurate. Now, what does God say? But certainly he must not be silent on it. What are we seeing here? And so I guess in the last few years, what I've been really focusing on is trying to translate MBTI into a biblical, looking at it through a biblical perspective. And translate, I guess, is a good word, because actually I'm working on a book. We didn't talk about this before, but I'm working on a book to try to translate it for people. And really, if it comes down to it, it's just MBTI is really just looking at a person and how they handle wisdom and how they handle knowledge. And it's divisible you get to 16, I'm sure it could actually be even more and more complex, but 16 is good enough for me. And it's really, how you handle it. So there's extroverted and introverted, and that's just kind of a term most people are comfortable with, but some of the other ones they're maybe a little more unfamiliar with. But how to communicate with people. My wife and I've got 6 kids, and my wife and I and my family, we use it daily. I wouldn't expect somebody to be able to do that right off the bat if they studied it. It's taken quite a few years, but we can hear, like when my wife and I have a discussion and it maybe turns to an argument sometimes, we can look at, oh, look what that, I'm using this function and you're using that function. Okay, we need to be careful here. And it's not an excuse, but it does kind of explain sort of what some of the patterns we fall into. Sure. And then we take that to the Bible and say, what does God say about that?
Yeah, I think that's good. I love it. It's not an excuse, but it explains. And I think integrating, how you would describe your personality does not usurp how God defines you as his son or daughter, and what the expectations are. So absolutely. Yeah, I love how you've married those and merged those, and how well you explain it and where you're coming from on that.
Thank you. Sort of really one of the things I want to slowly, I'm happy to use the word personality. I use it myself all the time, but just to let you know how I think in my mind and how I try to put out is I look at it as being God's image bearers. So how do we bear God's image? And I think we do it in different ways. And so like a secular way of saying it is personality, but maybe a biblical way would be saying, how do we bear God's image? So we can think about like the extrovert bearing God's image in a more all of these, God is can't be illustrated by a single person, right? But many people can show different aspects of God. And so some people who are very strong on traditions, right? They're very traditional. You have to have Thanksgiving on this day, and you have to do everything like that, and no variety. Well, there's a sense where God is unchanging. He's the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. But then there's another part of these free-spirited people that want to go do all these different things. And there's a sense in that too, where God is like the Holy Spirit. The Bible says he moves in different ways, and who can tell where he's moving and how he's moving. And so we kind of we see these people kind of manifesting different parts of how God is, but all of that needs to be brought under the scriptures. So if you're free-spirited, that's great. Just do it in line of scripture. If you're,
it's interesting. It's interesting you use that example, because I've never really thought about that before from the aspect of God being I don't know, multi-character, multi-dimensions of character is probably a better way to describe that. But from that standpoint, we are made in his image. And so we should expect, to a degree, different dynamics, or for us to have, like you said, from a non-biblical assessment or MBTI, they use the term personality, but in a sense, it kind of mirrors up with character as well, the character, and then the wisdom of wisdom and knowledge, like you mentioned earlier. So yeah. It is really interesting. And I've had more recently, and to kind of go back a little bit further, Jason and I did grow up together, and we've had some, I'm sure there's some, I've had some great memories doing stuff with his family. And, we used to go to the same church. We used to go ice skating and different things like that together. And, what was interesting to me was we were both in a church that, was very, had a very interesting dynamic. And I think, the more that we get into knowledge today and assessing different things, I think some people might have actually called it a cult, with some of the reactions, maybe some spiritual abuse. I've heard a lot. I've been doing a lot of research on that, And a lot of research and stuff that I've read, I think that's probably a good description of it.
Definitely living under the law, that's for sure.
Yeah, and just the understanding of, look, okay, just because the Bible says something, doesn't necessarily, like, we need to understand the application and how that's interpreted and how it's applied, and not just, pick and choose and try and motivate someone because the Bible says something, and take that out of context. And I think oftentimes moving that forward into, all of us are active in our churches and serving and whatnot. But today it's like, I don't want to do that. And the reason I go back to, some of those actions, I want to lead at my church. I want to have a successful ministry because I feel like that's what God wants me to do. I want to understand someone's characteristic or their personality to be able to disciple them, to lead them, to learn from them, and to build a relationship. So from that standpoint, it's kind of driven, I guess, being in that environment as well has kind of driven me to look at it more holistically from a large viewpoint, where I've said, wait a second, I don't want to be the individual that goes up to someone and says, well, you need to stand this post because I told you to, and because this is what you should do because I'm in charge and I'm the manager. And I've always had, I've been in retail and management for years and years. And I've always had that approach with people, that I believed that's where components of servant leadership come in that, we're not just holding our thumb over somebody and telling them to do something because they have to. We need to be actively looking for ways to connect with that individual and help them develop, the love for serving, the love for serving Christ that we have and we should have in those roles.
Yeah.
So
that's sort of how I'm trying to use it in my own family too, is that with 6 different kids, I could just tell them all, this is what you have to do. But I actually have reminders in my phone that ping me to remind me about some of the kids' personalities. This is after years. So like some kids really could use choices, and other kids would prefer to have you tell them, can you just tell me what you want? And that would help me out a lot. And other kids are like, if you could give me a couple of choices, I would be choice. Good, awesome. As long as they're good choices, let me pick something here and some freedom. So I use that even in my own family.
Well, and I think part of de-escalation, like we've had, there's a guy that we have on often, John Riley, that he specializes in teaching de-escalation and different things like that. Part of de-escalating a situation is offering choices, right? Like if you're in charge and you're trying to navigate that conversation, or bring it down to a more calm level, it's being able to throw out, okay, here, you have this choice or that choice. And I've used that with adults. Honestly, I've had situations at my church where I've said, okay, when there's a disagreement from a security standpoint, when there's a disagreement, okay, here's what we're going to do. You have this choice. We can do it this way. A, what's behind door A, or door B, which could involve handcuffs and a police officer and a ride downtown. I'm not going to say it doesn't, but I'm just going to throw that out there. So I definitely think you're spot on with that understanding. And again, you may not pick up if you're in a de-escalation situation, or you're in an emergency situation, or direct interaction with someone, I guess is the word I'm looking for. You may not be able to pick up on their personality or character traits that fast to be able to say, okay, they're acting like a, ENFJ, or they're acting like this or that. But at the same time, if you're in tune and you're knowledgeable, and that's why we wanted to bring this topic up again, if you're knowledgeable about the different aspects of that personality indicator and that sort of thing, then you can use that to your benefit to be able to say, not only with the people that you're in, but in a confrontational situation where you're serving in that capacity, you could easily say, okay, this person is acting like this, so I'm going to try and be gracious. I'm going to intentionally do this or that to
right. This reminds me of, it's sort of like, and that's, it's a love. It's very loving to
sure.
modify your behavior on behalf of the other person. Almost like when Paul says, when in Rome, be as the Romans, to the whatever it was, to whatever he had to be for the sake of the gospel. And that's just a very gracious thing to do. And sometimes we think, well, this is what's normal, but what's normal ends up being our own singular personality. And we don't realize that there's completely different ways of looking at the same exact situation. When I was thinking about that de-escalation, I don't want to, I'm not professing anything here as far as my own expertise, other than
Sure.
what might be helpful is if you heard this person speaking in a lot of logical terms, if you respond with logic and not values, you might be speaking his language. And if you hear the person speaking in values terms, if you want to stay with the values, you might be speaking their language. Again, that's and see, logic and values combined make wisdom. And so people just, it's like right-handed or left-handed. They prefer to use one or the other. And so if they're saying, oh, it's so bad and this and that, well, don't say, well, that's not true. Well, if you say that, now you're in conflict. But if you deal with the values, now if they say it's so bad, well, then you can kind of, if you have a value response, then you're not jumping a gap there. You're sort of staying on the same part of judgment. Just an idea that maybe somebody who's done that more than me would want to try. I guess where I do use it is in coaching for couples and things like that.
Sure.
So if the one spouse is logic dominant, I'll try to speak to them through logical terms. And if the one spouse is value dominant, I'll try to, express what's the values to consider. And that's usually very effective. It's how I want people to talk to me too, in values.
It's interesting when you said when you're talking about replacing the word personality with the image bearer of God, reminded me of a A.W. Tozer quote. What comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. And I think there's some tie into that of, it's much easier to see just in our humanity God's image in us than maybe sometimes in others. And so that the graciousness of being willing to do that is so important. And I think the other biblical principle that I hear coming out in this is we're all called to be good stewards. And that includes stewardship of relationships in the church, whether it's people on your security team, people who need to be ministered to that day. And so, there's just a lot of interesting, as you said, there's no MBTI in the Bible, but man, there's a lot of biblical principles that can improve your opportunities to minister and be good stewards of the relationships, as you said, living peaceably with all men. Yeah.
And if we just think about MBTI, at least when we're talking, I'm always thinking about MBTI. In my mind, I see wisdom and knowledge, and we're just talking about different parts of it, different ways to approach it. There's a lot of aspects to it, how it all kind of like fits together in the mind. So, yeah.
Let's do this. Let's go ahead for a little bit more context. Let's pull in the chart that you had.
Yep.
And because I kind of like you to go back through and just explain for those listening and maybe on the podcast later, but just for those listening, kind of explain your take on the wisdom and knowledge and value piece of it.
Okay, just stop me if I get into it too much.
Too deep? Okay.
I have lots of fun with it. So here, this will be, I think this is my personality here, and James, so far we're kind of thinking ENFJ, right? And let's see, Jared, we're going to go EN. I don't think ENTJ, but maybe, we'll see. Okay, so we'll talk about these three though for now.
Okay.
These top letters are just a formula. If you look at those letters and think that they are something, that is closer to the whole horoscope sort of idea. Because it's just a bunch of letters and it means
Mhm.
nothing. It's a formula and it points to these functions. And this is true for MBTI. This is consistent with MBTI's thinking as well, that this is a formula and it points to these functions. Now, these 4 functions, so when I say these 4 functions, for people not be able to see, there's 4 functions and 2 of them are going to be regarding wisdom. So we're going to do the ENFJ for James. That would be,
you can use me
values.
as the guinea pig.
Yeah, we'll use you as a guinea pig. So his wisdom would be in his flow state when things are going swimmingly for him. He's going to have objective values being worked on, and decisions are going to be made to objective values. Then over here, the last function is going to be internal logic. So that's the 2 wisdom functions on the outer ends, and on the inner 2 are going to be imagination or intuition, and that's going to be an internal process. So like how he sees his company, church safety guys going forward. A lot of these things he's going to see down the road further than a lot of people who don't have this NI function. And actually, Mike Scully, let's see, he's over here at INTJ. He can also do that pretty well. So they're a good team as far as looking down the road.
That's good to
and
know.
Then they're good. And then you have the SE here, this function here. This is part of knowledge. These 2 functions are part of knowledge. And the SE is objective sensing. So if you're going to make a big plan about going to the future, you have to objectively know your sensory information. Here's our budget. Here's where we live. Here's the churches that are interested in speaking with us. So
Sure.
That's the knowledge function. But what drives the judgment or the decision-making process is highly extroverted values, and then the TI logic. And so you can unpack this for everybody along the way. So I don't know if you want to do more of that chart. This is just a chart that C.S. Joseph, he's an interesting fellow online. I like his structure, but I don't like his application. His application, he does not align with, he rejects the Bible. And so his application, I think, really falls apart. But the structure, the way he lays this out, helps you identify people. So for instance, a direct person will be in this top row or this row here. And so you can help identify like a member of your team or somebody. If they're a direct speaker and they tend to be direct, they're going to be one of these 4 or one of these 4. And that helps you kind of grid off a personality type. That's why I like his chart there.
So that's more of like a general sample of knowing, okay, if this person is abrupt or something like that, then they're probably going to be in one of those.
Right. So like if we were to talk about yours again, so if you're direct, meaning you don't speak and then hope people get the implication, you kind of speak it directly and say, this is what I'm thinking, this is what I'm seeing. So you're more of a direct speaker. And then the abstract versus the concrete, I think people who know you well might think of you more as abstract from the point of view of holding ideas in your mind more than like really concrete people tend to be really good with the hammer and nail, the tools, fixing the car, fixing the this and that. Abstract tend to be more able to hold concepts in their minds and see a vision of process. So that would be, if we saw that you were direct and abstract, we would only have these 2 choices.
Sure.
These 4 choices. And then you could do more questions to try to figure out, are you affiliative, which is basically relating to people, or pragmatic, more related to the process.
So from that standpoint, would you say that people that are more imaginative with that would be better problem solvers because they can think outside the box?
Yeah, usually better problem solvers when it comes to it's very, you have to be very careful how I say it because it's in what field. So better problem solver, when you're fixing a car, if you have an ISTP in your corner, he's going to solve your problem in the real world. If you're going to have a relational or a team issue, you're going to be able to solve the problem. You know,
Okay.
different people are going to be able to solve problem solving in different ways. And so N really focuses on what hasn't happened yet and
Okay.
trying to make that happen, bring it into, so like the Wright brothers, right? Nobody had ever flown before in the real world. Like that was unrealistic. It's unpractical. But I can guarantee you one of them were N dominant, where they had an imagination, say, hey, let's fly. Like, what are you talking about? So they have to have a vision like, well, the birds can fly, and they can kind of see the vision, and then the S will make it effectively. When the N has won the S over, the S will make it happen. That's just a on paper sort of situation, but you can be trained in different ways. It's a natural thing.
So, I mean, from a concrete versus imaginative standpoint, you know, you could, like, I could say that, you know, my dad is very mechanically inclined, far more than I am, but at the same time, he's taught me over the years different things of how to do things, like with the car, and just as an example and that sort of thing. So how do you feel about, or how do you think that it applies with learning, even from a group or from a team standpoint? Like, would it be possible to really train someone in another area, or through experience in different things, or would it just be better for me to adjust what they're doing to their does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, so from our first talk 2 years ago till now, I have changed how I think about this to some degree. 2 years ago, I would have said it's really best to change their role to what they're designed to do. But now it's never an ideal situation. I've never seen a situation where you have everybody equally experienced, equally trained, equally, like, there's always all these variables. And so what I say now is understand the person. So pick who you think is the most qualified, and then understand how they need to learn, how they need to apply their skills. But there are going to be a lot of let me see. I'll give you a small example. So I'm an ENFP down here. So I'm NEFITESI. I had a parent, my mom, who was an ENFJ, and a father who was an ESFP. So if you can see here, look at this SE function. This means that they are often very capable of seeing the objective world the way things are. Here's SE here, and here's SE here.
Sure.
So they, by their own design, assume, and in their own marriage and own family, it's like SE is just a normal thing to have, right? Here I am here with SI low. So as we look at low, we're saying less and less energy is spent on this thing. Okay. Less and less energy as we go down. Well, SE is as far away as you can get for myself, because this is the that goes into more. So I don't have SE. We'll say it that way. I don't have SE in the top function. And yet I was trained by my parents to use it, and I don't essentially have it. So I became an electrician, and I did a lot of things in the trades that blood, sweat, and tears, pain, suffering. I spent 20 years in the trades, and I finally said, you know what? I'm not an electrician. That's just, I had my own company. I worked for myself for 5 years, and I just was never like the other guys, quote unquote, who were successful. And really what it turns out is they were in this S column over here. Both of these, they're much more S dominant. There is a place for me in the electrical field. It's just that it's not, it has to be a very large company. And I would probably be more into the advertising and sales than actual wiring.
This hour of broadcasting brought to you by TwoWayRadioCenter.com, a Motorola value-added reseller. Thank you for joining the Church Safety Guys broadcast, brought to you by Vigilant Impact. We hope that you found it informative, and we appreciate your feedback and interaction. Be sure to share our broadcast with your teams, join the discussion online, and connect with us on social media. For other great ministry resources, download the Church Security app or at our website at churchsafetyguys.com. Remember, keep a servant's heart, a mindset of ministry, and semper disciplina. Always be training. Have a blessed week.